Hello, everyone, and welcome to another special episode of the Financial Insight Show. As part of our energy series, we decided to speak to the maestro from the Zambia Manufacturers Association, Mr. Ashu Sagar, who is a good friend of ours who always gives us the insights we need to know about what's going on in the manufacturing sector. Ashu, welcome to the fifth show again.
Thanks, Mwelwa. Thanks for inviting us. I don't know about maestro. It makes me sound like a magician.
There you go. But we're hoping that you'll shed some light and magic on today's conversation. Our viewers and followers all know that Zambia is currently experiencing a power deficit, which has led to lengthy hours of load shedding, which has impacted a broad spectrum of society. Now, manufacturing is obviously one of those sectors that has been impacted with notices of load shedding for 6 to 12 hours. We just want to get to understanding at the moment from your membership, how has been the impact of the load shedding that has now engulfed Zambia?
Look, the impact is quite. I don't know if I should use the word severe, but it is quite bad, in the sense that we're now at 12 hours, according to the schedule, and when we look at the way ZESCO keeps its timings, we probably touch 14 hours because they don't keep the timings. So it's had issues in terms of cutting production time. Manufacturing is a very, very time and labor intensive, in the sense that you try and use a factory for 24 hours. Using it for 12 hours is really not using your capital investment to its optimum. And also from the aspect of planning, I think when we have load shedding starting at times that are not assigned and then extending beyond times that you're supposed to come back on, I think is creating a lot of disruption in our manufacturing planning. The knock-on effects are yet to be seen. I think a lot of the manufacturers are trying to readjust and make sure that they don't have a shift sent away. These are real problems that we have to face. So I think a lot of the manufacturers have done well in trying to readjust, but it is a very, very tough time.
But when you say readjusting, are you able to give us examples of what readjusting looks like? Because when we look at the macroeconomic indicators, inflation continues to be strongly in double digits, in the mid 15s. But then, as well as the exchange rate on top of that, haven't all of these now compounded to the point where now some of your members are now re-looking at even staff numbers, for example?
Yeah, look, staff numbers is something that does come into the conversation, right? When you look at, if you don't have power and you cannot produce, then you have a situation where most manufacturers have shifts. It'll either be 3 8-hour shifts or 2 12-hour shifts, and now you don't have power for 12 hours. What do you do? So when I say readjust, some manufacturers are holding on in terms of trying to reassign people through the shifts to make sure that you don't send anyone home. But there may be some who can't afford. If you cannot manufacture and you cannot keep your volumes, you cannot meet your fixed costs, then you have to reassess your situation. Yes, you can invest in diesel generators to make sure that you keep your factories running, and that's what some manufacturers have done. So you keep your factories running and you don't have to send people home. But there may be some that cannot afford to do that, especially on the SME and MSME side. But the bigger guys, I think, are managing to find ways around the energy supply situation to keep a factory open for the full time.
Now, we're obviously seeing, the numbers, the inflation numbers,
Yes.
and you've just spoken about, some members may be considering using diesel generators. Those costs obviously have to be passed back, down to consumers, don't they?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. That there's nothing much you can do about it. But when we're looking at the aspects of, the alternative cost, if you do not keep in production, you lose market share. And the cost of that down the road, when you're kicking the can down the road, it actually might be more than what you're spending on energy. So yes, immediately you may find it affecting some of the consumer prices, because the energy costs compared to ZESCO and running a generator is probably 3 to 4 times. And that cost has to be absorbed somewhere. and more likely it will be in the product.
Right. Now, Ashu, obviously this now begs the question, when it comes to having a sustainable ESI, electricity supply industry, it means that the true costs have to be captured in things like the tariff, just as well you've described. What's Manufacturers Association's position on the issue of cost-reflective tariff? And does that, on the one side, maybe become, if I can describe it, a threat or an opportunity for us to have, have input costs that are more reflective of what's in reality, as opposed to seeking out subsidies, for example, for things like electricity?
See, there's two aspects to the cost of power, right? One is the cost of reflective tariff, and two is the cost of how ZESCO runs. Okay, so there's two things that we've been talking about. One is ZESCO's cost structures justifying a rate increase, right? Two, yes, a rate increase of some sort is needed to allow for investment in the sector, in the energy sector. But if you see what was done early this year, which was a good move, is to allow open access to grid. Now, open access to grid will allow for independent power producers or people who have access to energy from the South African power pool, for example, to sell directly to consumers at a negotiated price. What that should do is free up space for ZESCO to continue supplying, one, the social tariff for the people, which I think is something that you may find is difficult to have in a conversation in terms of raising that cost, because it's directly to the cost to the individual. Two, it allows for a little more flexibility on what the cost of tariff should be for the manufacturing and agriculture sector. Now, you see, when you look at the biggest consumers of electricity right now, it's probably the mining sector, right? So with open access to grid, I think you will find that the mining sector will probably pay a cost-reflective tariff. And when you look at the prices of copper, they can afford to do such. Hopefully that will take off demand from the core supply of ZESCO, right, and allow it to give us more favorable tariffs to the manufacturing sector and the commercial sector. I don't think anyone is saying that tariffs must not go up. It's already been approved in their multi-year.
Right, and how did the membership receive
I mean,
that?
look, it's something that we've adjusted to, but in reality, when you look at it, the kwacha has depreciated more than the cost-reflective tariff adjustment, and I think ZESCO is probably worse off. But in that, we always ask the question: is ZESCO's overheads justified in the way they run the institution? I think when you want a price to be justified, you have to look at both sides. One is the cost-reflective tariff, the demand side. There's also the supply side in terms of the institution that runs it. Is it run, without unnecessary costs and even interference, to make sure that it's selling the price and not covering an inefficiency? I think that's the word that we're looking for. Is it run efficiently, or is there inefficiencies that are being priced to the end user?
Right. Now, Ashu, obviously you've brought up the issue of independent power producers, and with the conversations Financial Insight is having, it seems IPPs offer solutions and possibly the way to go regarding how we resolve this energy debacle. What's Manufacturing Association's position on IPPs? And you've just described how maybe there could be solutions that see IPPs supplying your members directly. Are those some of the proposals that you're probably making?
Yes. Yeah. So we're already in discussion with a couple of the. I wouldn't say there's not necessarily the IPPs, but the intermediary parties that are, for example, agents that are able to secure power from third parties and supply them to manufacturers. A key issue in this is the aspect of rolling out smart metering. And we've been pushing ZESCO to actually introduce smart metering in an accelerated manner. And what smart metering does is, we are two industries next to each other, well, you and I, right? I'm willing to pay, say, 16 cents for for power, but you are not. But we're on the same line.
Right.
So what smart metering will do is, on a load shedding schedule, they will keep you off but keep me on at the higher tariff. So this is something that we're saying is very, very important as a practical solution that needs to be implemented actually like yesterday. When we're having discussions with ZESCO, we're again engaging them, I think, tomorrow to try and get this rolled out, where the manufacturers who are on common lines can actually have isolation. Those that have dedicated lines are very different. There's some manufacturers that have what we call dedicated lines. And dedicated lines allows you to pay a higher tariff or emergency power, as now ZESCO is calling it, for you to be secure for supply.
Okay, now that's very, very interesting. So that does present an opportunity for IPPs, for example, that are being developed to now supply directly to you.
It does, but the thing is, unless you smarten the grid,
correct,
you can't do anything. So unless you make the grid, smart in two aspects. One is smart metering, and also its stability of the grid. Our grid, when you talk to some of the experts, I'm not one, but they tell you that our grid is not really designed around too many variables. And I think that's something we also have to look at in terms of the conversation for longer periods. But IPPs, yes, will have a role to play in that. For example, if an IPP that has 100 megawatt capacity or 60, and they decide to supply a mine directly, what it does is it takes off the demand from the grid. So the opportunity is twofold. One is direct supply, and two is taking demand off the grid through a power purchase agreement between the two, using ZESCO's grid to supply, but we can now still stay with ZESCO as our supplier. So there's a lot that I think the role of IPP should not be just looked as direct supply, but also substitution of supply on existing customers.
Right. Now, on a final note, in the near term, what is the outlook for manufacturing with the current power challenges that we're having, and with the conversations that you've had and you continue to have? What is the forecast looking like? Because obviously, for us, financial insight is the concerns on inflation, as we put it earlier on. Do we see light at the end of the tunnel, as it were, from all these conversations that you're having with key stakeholders?
So before I touch that, there's one aspect I didn't touch in the IPP side. Now, what we've just been discussing actually with the Ministry of Finance just a few hours ago is the issue of captive power. Now, captive power is where companies have their own power plant for their own use, and there's some like cement factories that do that. The sugar does that, and we have a situation now where excise duty is charged on your own consumption. So then the incentive to produce for yourself goes away. So even simple interventions like that, where we look at the excise duties removed for captive power, they now will produce enough energy for themselves. So there's excess capacity, there's more capacity on the grid. Right? So that's one aspect I think I just wanted to highlight. That it needs to also be looked at. Now, when you talk about outlook going forward for the manufacturing sector, look, 2024 is a very, very unique year in terms of two aspects. One is energy, where we are 90% reliant on hydropower.
Right.
And if in this we should have learned some lessons, and learned some lessons very quickly to diversify our energy mix. Two, the supply chains have been affected. When I'm talking about supply chains, especially agriculture, if you've had severe crop failure, which is why we've had a declaration of an emergency state with the supply of food for our country, supply chain of raw material is also going to affect us in 2024 and possibly into much of 2025. It's a tough 12 months ahead, not just on energy side, raw materials side, especially on agri-processing, is very, very important. So with that in mind, we have to find ways of basically getting past the 12 months, is the way I'd say it, in making sure that you have enough power to at least cover keep your company open and cover your overheads. Two, in terms of at least being able to process the little raw material that does come in, especially from agri-processing. Three is basically planning around that, and unfortunately to say this, you might be importing raw material on certain fronts. But I don't think it's all, I shouldn't say it's all doom and gloom. We need to make sure that we are proactive, especially I think from alternative power supply. getting past July,
Mm-hmm.
I would say by end of July, August, September, October, is going to be a different ball game from what we're being told, especially with the possibilities of Kariba
Mm-hmm.
not being able to sustain those months properly.
Right.
So we just have to, I think if we can find alternative power supply,
Mm-hmm.
and if it means companies running on generator sets
Mhm.
and not making any, I think it's a situation where you're just breaking even, but
Mhm.
riding the storm.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's what it's going to be.
Right. Right. So I guess opportunities then now for IPPs then now to step up. Or
Yeah, but
Is-
the IPPs take time, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the
Yeah.
fastest IPPs to roll out, really, is solar and wind.
Mm.
When you look at things like thermal, when
Mhm.
you look at Mamba Collieries,
Mhm.
that's 2.5, 3 years ago,
Mhm.
2.5 years away.
Mhm.
Then you got solar is very, very fast.
Mhm.
Wind is also very, very fast. But I think this is where I think ZESCO also has to step up and be proactive in making sure that those deals happen, maybe with a bit of help from government,
Mm.
because the potential loss of value addition because of lack of energy, it's probably more. The opportunity cost is really more than the cost of investment in energy. So it's not just IPPs. I think it's everybody who's involved in that sector really needs to step up together
Mhm.
in the interests of the country.
Absolutely. Ashu Sagar, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
And we look forward to hosting you again on another important topical issue.
All right. It's all good. Thank you.
There you have it. The head of the head of Zambia Association of Manufacturers, Ashu Sagar, who's been speaking to us about the energy situation and how his membership are coping with it. Stay tuned for more insights on the energy series on Financial Insight and Get to Know.